You ever been so underestimated, so dismissed, that your very presence was treated like a mistake? That's what happened to me at a gala dripping in wealth, hosted by the very woman who tried to erase me from existence. They called me a waitress, tried to escort me out like I didn't belong, but I wasn't there to serve. I was there to reclaim everything they told me I could never have. When my mom was alive, everything felt warm. I used to fall asleep to the sound of her humming, the scent of lavender from her hands brushing my hair. I was just a little girl, but I understood I was loved. After her death, that warmth evaporated. My dad couldn't see it, but the light left with her. Elaine didn't walk in. As a stepmother, she entered like a queen seizing a broken kingdom. She smiled for the photos, played the role in public, but behind closed doors, she drew lines. At first, it was subtle. Madison needed the better room, the newer clothes, the louder praise. I told myself I was imagining things, but kids feel when love is being rationed. I tried to please her. I really did. I helped in the kitchen, complimented her dresses, even gave up time with Dad when she needed him. But no matter how hard I tried, she looked at me like I was the mistake my dad couldn't erase. I'd hear her voice float from their room. "I'm trying, Thomas," but she just resists me. My father, lost in grief and business, stopped seeing me, and I stopped expecting him to. The art I once drew for him went ignored, my milestones celebrated with cold smiles. Elaine always had an excuse to miss my recitals. And Madson. She had a way of laughing at my pain that felt rehearsed. I'm Harper Matthews. I grew up learning to disappear in my own house. But even invisible children grow up, and some of us come back not to beg, but to be seen for who we became despite them. If you've ever felt discarded in your own home, hit that subscribe button because you're not alone, and your story deserves to be told. I remember sitting by the window waiting for him. Every Sunday at 4 p.m., I told myself he'd walk in with ice cream, like he used to, but Sunday after Sunday, it was just me and the ticking clock. I wanted to believe work was the reason. That grief had stolen his energy, not his love for me. But the truth came wrapped in quiet choices. Madison's horse riding lessons were never postponed. Her birthdays became grand affairs with violinists and chocolate fountains. Mine became afterthought cake from the store and a happy birthday, Sweetie said while distracted. My father had checked out, and Elaine had changed the locks to his heart. At school, I stopped trying to explain my family. I became the girl who stayed quiet during family tree projects. I poured myself into part-time jobs, into books, into anything that let me feel in control. Meanwhile, Madison lived in designer everything and called me the girl Dad felt sorry for. I started hearing the stories, how Elaine made sure I wasn't included in family trips, how she'd cancel family dinners when I was home from school. When I tried to speak up, I became the problem. Ungrateful, dramatic. My dad's tired eyes would look through me, not at me. Love isn't always absent in loud moments. Sometimes it disappears in silence, in the space between your voice and their decision not to hear it. That silence shaped me more than their cruelty ever did. I became resilient not because they lifted me, but because I had to lift myself. After Dad's heart attack, there were no second chances. No closure, no final "I love you." Just a sterile hospital hallway and the crushing realization that I was already too late. Elaine stood by the bed, her hand clutching his like she owned every piece of his legacy. And maybe she did. The funeral was a parade of strangers in black and family members I hadn't seen in years. I sat in the back, ignored. Madison gave the eulogy. Elaine wept for cameras and condolences. And me. I felt like a ghost at my own father's burial. My grief was invisible just like me. Then came the reading of the will. That was the moment the door truly closed. Elaine inherited almost everything. Madison received properties, trust funds, a future paved in luxury. I got tuition money and a tiny inheritance that wouldn't cover 6 months in Boston. Your father wanted you to learn hard work, Elaine told me with a smile, as fake as her sympathy. I was told to leave the family home within a week. Madison laughed as I packed, standing in the doorway like a queen watching a servant be dismissed. "We're changing our traditions anyway," she said, like I've just been voted off the island. The message was clear. I was no longer a Matthews. I left that house with 2 suitcases, a broken heart, and a promise I whispered to myself. One day, they'd remember me. Not as the disappointment Elaine painted me to be, but as the woman who rose from everything they tried to bury her under. When you grow up on the outside of your own family, you stop dreaming of being accepted. You start focusing on survival. College became my lifeline, a place where no one knew me as Elaine's stepdaughter. I worked at the library, skipped parties, saved every dollar. Independence wasn't a goal, it was a necessity. While Madison traveled Europe, I was budgeting groceries down to the cent. She posted photos from private yachts while I biked through Boston rain to make shifts on time. Still, I told myself I was lucky. I was earning what I had. I wasn't some pampered heir living off the illusion of love. Even during the hardest moments, like choosing rent over art supplies, I clung to the belief that someday I'd build a life where I wouldn't have to prove my worth. I didn't need validation, just a fair shot, but even that seemed like a luxury no one was willing to give me. Elaine would send the occasional Christmas card, never signed, always printed, a formality for appearances, new invitation, no call. Just a reminder that I still existed in their files, not in their hearts. It was deliberate, calculated. She wanted me to know I was forgotten, but I wasn't. Not by the universe. Not by the quiet part of me that still believed I could rewrite my story. Sometimes survival is the seed that blooms into transformation, and I was starting to feel roots push through the wreckage they left behind. When I graduated, no one clapped for me in the audience. No flowers, no dinner, no proud family photo. Just a single moment on stage with a piece of paper I'd fought harder for than anyone knew. That diploma wasn't just proof of education, it was proof I could build a life without them. Boston became my blank canvas. I moved into a cramped studio in Cambridge, hung my own art on the walls, and called it mine. There was no safety net, but there was freedom. I was the architect of my mornings, the protector of my peace, and for the first time, I breathed without waiting for the next blow. The gallery job was small but meaningful. I saw myself in the struggling artists who walked through our doors, overlooked and desperate to be seen for what they created rather than what they lacked. Helping them helped me. Their courage fed my own. No one in my new world knew about Elaine or Madison or the cold silence of family dinners I was excluded from. That anonymity was healing. I wasn't the discarded daughter, I was Harper, the woman who curated exhibits, drank black coffee, and rode the subway home to something she built. And yet, in quiet moments, the ache would resurface. I didn't want their money or their approval. I just wanted to know that I had mattered, that I hadn't been invisible to the man who once called me his whole world. That ache stayed with me until a stranger walked into my gallery and changed everything. I almost didn't notice him. Just another man in a button-down wet from spring rain, staring at the canvases like he was looking for a way out of his own mind. But there was something different in his gaze. It wasn't just admiration. It was recognition, like he saw the story behind the strokes. He asked questions no collector ever asked. He listened, not just nodded. He wanted to understand the artist, the process, the pain in the paint. It felt like the first real conversation I'd had in weeks. Not about sales, not about donors, just about meaning and the spaces we hide in color. When he handed me his card, I read the name twice. Nathan Reed. I'd heard of him, of course. The golden boy of Boston Tech. But that day, he didn't act like a billionaire. He acted like someone who understood the weight of being underestimated. And that, more than his name, made me curious. Our first coffee turned into hours, then days, then a rhythm I didn't see coming. He never asked about my past. He never tried to fix me. He just listened and made space for the parts of me that had always been too heavy for others to carry. I didn't fall for his fortune. I fell for his stillness, his presence, his quiet belief in the value of things unseen. For the first time, someone looked at me and saw more than my losses. He saw potential, beauty, worth. And I started seeing it too. Nathan never asked me to explain the scars. He didn't push when I changed the subject or went quiet at the mention of family. He simply stayed. That quiet, steady presence became more healing than any apology I never got. He gave me what they never could accept without a checklist. We didn't fall in love through grand gestures. It was in the small things. How he remembered my favorite tea. How he read every caption in the gallery before commenting. How he waited for me to speak, even when silence stretched. In his world, I was never too much or not enough. That kind of love changes you. It makes you question every past relationship that felt like performance. It shines a light on all the spaces where you twisted yourself to fit into someone else's idea of lovable. With Nathan, I didn't have to earn my place. I already had it. I told him about Elaine in pieces. In late-night conversations over kitchen counters. Under warm blankets, I told him how it felt to be erased while still alive. How it broke something essential in me, something I didn't know how to fix. He never offered pity, only presence. The night I finally told him everything, I cried for hours. Not because he said the right words, but because he stayed while I unraveled. That kind of love. It doesn't rescue you. It reminds you you were never lost to begin with, just hidden beneath the silence others built around you. There's a certain power in being seen fully without performance. It's terrifying at first, like standing in front of a mirror after years of avoiding your own reflection. But once you feel it, you crave it. You wonder how you survived so long without it. With Nathan, I let the mask slip. Not just the strong, independent woman everyone saw at the gallery, but the girl who still mourned her father, who still asked what she did wrong to deserve abandonment. And somehow, he didn't flinch. He leaned closer. He never tried to fix me. He didn't recite motivational quotes or downplay my pain. He just listened. And in that listening, I felt more love than I had in my entire life. Vulnerability wasn't weakness with him. It was the bridge between us. For the first time, I started to imagine a future that wasn't shaped by the past. A life where love wasn't conditional. Where family meant showing up, not shutting down. And that future didn't feel like a fantasy anymore. It felt possible, real. Nathan proposed with quiet sincerity. No audience, no performance. Just him holding my hands, saying he wanted to face life with me. Not because I was polished or perfect, but because I was me. Flawed, fiery, passionatum, finally free. Our wedding wasn't about show. It was about soul. A handful of people, a quiet backyard, a promise made under open skies, no socialites, no press releases, just two people choosing each other and letting the past stay where it belonged. I didn't invite Elaine or Madison, not because I wanted revenge, but because I'd outgrown the need for their approval. Their absence didn't leave a hole. It made space for the kind of love that healed rather than harmed, and that was more sacred than any family name. Nathan's family became my home. His mother called me her daughter before the paperwork did. His sister brought me into every tradition without question. For once, I belonged without proving. I was welcomed without edits. That kind of love leaves no room for old wounds to fester. Still, there were moments of grief. Not for the people who discarded me, but for the girl who once begged for scraps of love at their table. She didn't die. She evolved. She found a different table, a different kind of feast, one built on honor, not hierarchy. I wasn't trying to replace the past. I was choosing not to let it define me. And that subtle shift changed everything. It turned loss into liberation, pain into purpose, and set the stage for what came next. The moment where the life I built would collide with the one I left behind. When the cream-colored envelope arrived, it felt like a trick. My fingers trembled as I opened it, half expecting it to be a cruel joke. But there it was, Elaine's handwriting. Perfectly neat, perfectly fake. "The family misses you," she'd written, but I knew better. The timing was too perfect, too calculated. No birthdays, no graduations, no moments of my success. Just now, after my name had begun appearing in the same circles she desperately clawed to stay relevant in. Now I mattered, but not for who I was. Nathan's reaction was quiet, but his eyes gave him away. He saw through it instantly. "She knows," he said, setting the invitation down like it might bite him. "She knows who you married." And suddenly, the past wasn't just knocking, it was demanding a seat at our table. Part of me wanted to burn the card. Another part wanted to go just to prove that I could. Not out of vengeance, but for the younger version of me though, one who was told to use the side entrance, the one who had to ask permission to exist. It wasn't about being seen anymore. It was about choosing when and how I allowed myself to be visible. I wasn't the girl in the shadows anymore. I was the woman who had built a life so beautiful, it made people regret leaving me behind. Nathan suggested we go on our terms. "You walk in first," he said, "and I'll come later." His confidence in me was unshakable. But even then I questioned mine. Could I really face them again? Not as the girl they broke, but as the woman they underestimated. I stood in front of the mirror the night before, studying my reflection in that midnight blue gown. It wasn't armor. It wasn't disguise. It was declaration. Every stitch told a story of survival. Every shimmer reminded me that I no longer needed their validation. The plan was to make a scene. It wasn't even about confrontation. It was about closure. About facing ghosts without flinching. About proving to myself more than anyone that I could walk into that room and not feel small. Nathan held me the night before the event and said, "If at any moment this feels like too much, I'll come get you." That safety net changed everything. I wasn't walking into the lion's den alone. I had someone who believed in me, even when I didn't. The next morning, I didn't feel fear. I felt clarity. This wasn't about revenge. This was about restoration. Not for them, but for me. I wasn't returning to beg for acceptance. I was arriving to reclaim the part of me they tried to erase. When I stepped into the ballroom, every chandelier sparkled like the universe itself was cheering me on. I wasn't the forgotten stepdaughter anymore. I was Harper Reed, wife, professional, whole. And no one there could rewrite that truth. The whispers started before I made it to the check-in table. Familiar faces squinting, calculating, trying to figure out how I'd managed to appear so composed, so radiant. But they didn't know the cost of this calm. They didn't know what it took to get here. Elaine's eyes met mine across the room. The smile never reached her eyes. Madison's smirk twitched at the corners, uncertain now. I wasn't the version of Harper they remembered. I wasn't flinching. I wasn't folding. I was simply unshaken. They tried to humiliate me, tried to reduce me to the role they thought I was born to play background noise. But what they didn't know was that I'd already cast myself in the starring role of my life. Their approval was no longer the climax of my story. And then when Nathan walked in, the room shifted. Not because of who he was, but because of what we represented. A new definition of family, one built on truth, respect, and mutual love. We weren't there to seek belonging. We were there to demonstrate it. The worst pain wasn't their laughter. It wasn't even the mockery. It was the silence of the people who had once called me family. The cousins who played tag with me in the garden, the aunts who braided my hair. None of them said a word. They watched as Elaine called security on me, like I was some stranger who didn't belong. Like I hadn't once lived in their homes, cried in their arms, celebrated holidays beside them. Their silence screamed louder than any insult. I kept thinking, what would my mother have done if she were alive? She would have stepped in, she would have reminded them who I was, but she wasn't there. And no one else wanted to remember. To them, I had become a blurry footnote. I realized in that moment that these people didn't fail me because they hated me. They failed me because they didn't care enough to speak. And in families like this, apathy is worse than cruelty. At least cruelty acknowledges your presence. That's when the clarity came. This wasn't about reclaiming a seat at their table. It was about flipping the whole table over. Because sometimes the only way to move forward is to stop begging for scraps and start building your own banquet. The moment Nathan stepped through the ballroom doors, everything stopped. It wasn't just the shock of seeing him, it was the realization on every face that the narrative had changed. Suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. I was the woman beside him. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone was enough. Calm, composed, commanding. He looked at me like I was the only person in that glittering room who mattered. And for the first time that night, I felt safe. When he called me my wife, it was as if the word had weight. It anchored me. It shattered the illusion Elaine had so carefully crafted, because in that single moment, he validated every truth they tried to erase from my story. People began to shift. Murmurs turned into apologies. Hands that once pointed now reached out to shake his, but he didn't care about them. He cared about me. His outrage wasn't performative, it was protective. And that distinction changed everything. He didn't rescue me. He stood with me. And there's a world of difference between the two. Because I wasn't a damsel in distress, he was a woman who had already survived the fire. He just reminded everyone that I wasn't burned. I was transformed. Elaine's face when Nathan revealed the truth that her gala existed only because of my husband was unforgettable. For once, her mask cracked. And behind it I saw what had always been there. Fear. Fear of losing control. Madison went from predator to pretender in seconds. Her fake smile, her sudden warmth, it was embarrassing. But it wasn't new. That's how this family worked. Admiration was conditional. Kindness was transactional. Everything depended on your usefulness. But this time, I wasn't playing their game. I didn't need their validation, and that made me powerful. For once, they were scrambling to stay in my orbit, and it was poetic justice to watch them sweat in the same room they once tried to exile me from. This wasn't just about standing up for myself. It was about severing the root of a toxic legacy. A legacy where status trumped sincerity, where silence bought comfort, where love was measured in public perception rather than private sacrifice. By reclaiming my story, I wasn't just breaking free, I was breaking a cycle. One that had long rewarded cruelty and shamed vulnerability. And as I looked around that glittering ballroom, I knew I'd never let another generation inherit those chains. That night, power shifted, and it was on to just social. It was spiritual. The family who once defined me by what I lacked suddenly found themselves scrambling to redefine their relevance. Because the one they discarded had returned with quiet fire. Nathan didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stated facts. The same facts they had ignored for years. And when the truth came dressed in success and composure, they couldn't look away, because it was undeniable. I had risen. They thought they were protecting the family name by pushing me out. But now, I was the reason that name would continue to carry influence in Boston's circles. My presence, once deemed embarrassing, had become indispensable, and in their rush to save face, they revealed everything. The cracks in their unity, the desperation behind their false smiles, the hollowness of a legacy built on exclusion. I didn't need revenge. They were already unraveling. I just had to stand still and let their own actions echo. Because sometimes, the loudest victory is silence in the face of someone else's regret. And that night, my silence was thunderous. They tried to strip me of my place in the Matthews family. But the irony, it was that naming father's name that funded the new beginning. The Thomas Matthews Art Therapy Foundation wasn't just a tribute. It was a reclamation. I didn't need their approval to honor my father. I needed truth. And the truth was, he may have failed me in the end, but his heart had never been mine to fully lose. His legacy belonged just as much to me as to anyone else. Starting the foundation wasn't about erasing pain, it was about transforming it, channeling it into healing for others, for kids who, like me, had been silenced, sidelined, or overlooked. It gave meaning to my suffering, a reason for every scar. I didn't want his name on another gala banner. I wanted it in hospitals, in classrooms, in the hands of children painting out their grief. That was how his name would live on, not in fake smiles, but in authentic restoration. And when the board approved the initiative and I stood to give that first speech, I didn't feel like the broken girl they once discarded. I felt like the architect of something real. Something good, something that would outlive all their manipulation. Healing didn't come all at once. It came in waves, small moments where I stopped flinching at the sound of Madison's name or Elaine's voice. It came when I stopped needing them to change, for me to move on. That was my turning point. Closure didn't mean reconciliation. It meant peace. Peace that didn't need permission or acknowledgement. Peace that said, even if they never apologize, I'm free. That was the peace I chose. And that choice changed everything. I found joy in small things again. Coffee with Nathan, art classes with kids, late-night conversations with Janet. The life I had built on my own terms finally felt like home. And every day I spent outside of their influence felt like liberation. They never deserved my energy, but I'd given them so much of it. Now I was done. Done proving, done performing, done hoping. I had everything I needed in front of me, and everything I didn't have, I no longer wanted. Because true freedom isn't just walking away, it's never looking back with longing. It's looking forward with clarity, and for the first time in years, I could see clearly, not them, not the pain, but the horizon. And I was already walking toward it. The greatest lesson I took from that night wasn't about revenge, it was about clarity, because standing in that ballroom, surrounded by relatives who once made me feel invisible, I finally saw them for who they truly were. Fragile, insecure, pretending. For years, I believed I needed their approval to be whole, that if I just proved I was successful, maybe they'd finally accept me. But the truth is, their validation would have been hollow, because it would never be about love, only status. Nathan showed me a different kind of family, one where support isn't conditional, where kindness isn't rationed based on usefulness, where love doesn't ask for you to shrink to fit. He didn't rescue me from them. He reminded me I didn't need rescuing. When he held my hand that night, it wasn't a grand gesture, it was a quiet declaration. I see you. You belong. Not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. That kind of love heals things that apologies never could. And that's the family I choose now. Not the one that cast me out to protect their image, but the one that stood by me even when there was no spotlight. Love, after all, isn't defined by blood. It's revealed by presence, especially when no one else stays. For so long, I lived quietly out of sight, out of their conversations, out of their considerations. But what they never realized was that silence didn't mean weakness. It meant restraint. It meant choosing my battles. It meant learning who I really was without the noise. They mistook my absence for failure. My modest life, my small gallery job, my quiet wedding, none of it fit their narrative of success. But while they paraded their curated perfection, I was building something real. No applause, no approval, just purpose. There's a unique kind of strength that comes when no one's watching. When your victories are quiet, when your healing is personal, and when your growth isn't posted for applause but felt in your soul, that's the strength they never learned to respect. They operated in a world where power was loud, status was performative, and relationships were currency. But I found something more enduring, a power that didn't need to be announced, a presence that didn't need a pedestal, a value that was self-defined. So when I stood in that ballroom, I didn't need their permission to feel worthy. I didn't need their kindness to feel loved. I wasn't there for validation. I was there to close a door with dignity, not drama, because real growth doesn't scream, it stands. After the gala, I realized I had a choice. I could spend my energy trying to fix what they broke, or I could build something entirely new, something they couldn't touch. I chose the latter, and it was the most liberating decision of my life. We founded the Thomas Matthews Art Therapy Foundation not to honor a legacy, but to redeem one, to take what they corrupted, his name, his wealth, his image, and channel it into something healing, not for them, for the children who actually needed family. Through that foundation, I've met kids whose stories mirrored mine. Abandonment, grief, silence. They come in timid, shoulders slumped, eyes tired, but when handed a paintbrush, a lump of clay, a journal, they come alive. They speak without speaking, and in every one of their breakthroughs, I see a younger version of myself being heard for the first time. I don't need Elaine or Madison to understand why this work matters. I see it every day in the art, in the breakthroughs, in the tears. This is legacy. I used to think legacy meant inheritance, wealth, name, but now I understand it's the impact we make in the lives we touch. It's the healing we create in spaces we once bled. It's the light we choose to shine, especially in rooms that once tried to dim us. What the gala really did was expose the final illusion that they ever truly cared. When push came to shove, Their concern wasn't for me, it was for optics, power, and reputation. And seeing that truth clearly, it was a strange kind of freedom. I grieved that truth for years, hoping they'd eventually choose love. But some people choose image every time, and I had to stop punishing myself for expecting them to be more. Because holding out hope can become its own kind of prison. The moment I stopped expecting change, I began creating change. In my own life, in my own world. And it started with acknowledging that their rejection wasn't a reflection of me. It was a limitation of who they were willing to become. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant forgiving myself for holding on so long, for measuring my worth by their silence, for giving my heart to people who only understood leverage. I had to teach myself that I deserved unconditional. Now, when I think of family, I don't see a shared last name. I see shared values, shared empathy, shared healing. The illusion is gone, and in its place is something solid, something true. Not what I lost, but what I finally chose. Family used to be a painful word for me. It reminded me of exclusion, control, and conditional acceptance. But now, that word means something entirely different. It's not about blood, it's about belonging. It's about who chooses you. Nathan's family taught me that. They didn't just accept me. They embraced me not because of who I married, but because of who I was. I didn't have to prove myself or fit a mold. They saw my heart and said, "You're safe here. You're home." And in that safety, I healed. I stopped flinching at kindness. I stopped questioning whether I was enough. I stopped replaying old wounds like a broken record. Because when someone loves you, right? Your spirit finally stops whispering, "Am I okay?" We talk about chosen family as if it's second best, but I've learned it can be first-class love. It's intentional, it's deliberate, it's built on choice, not obligation, and that's what makes it so powerful. Because love that's chosen is rooted. So when people ask me now about my family, I smile. I tell them about the ones who stayed, the ones who showed up, the ones who healed with me. Blood might start a story, but it doesn't have to end it. I wrote a new ending, one worth reading. For years, I moved through life apologizing for existing, for not fitting, for wanting more than crumbs. But those days are done. I no longer shrink myself to make others feel comfortable. I exist fully now and apologetically whole. I don't hide my success to spare egos. I don't soften my story to make villains more palatable, and I certainly don't dull my shine so that those who tried to break me can feel better about themselves. I've earned every inch of this freedom. Healing isn't polite, it's disruptive. It shakes old systems. It confronts generational patterns, and it declares, the pain stops here. That's what I did. I stopped the cycle. I refused to become bitter, small, or vengeful. I chose to elevate. I still carry scars. I still feel echoes of rejection. But those marks don't define me. They remind me of where I've been, of what I've overcome, of the quiet battles no one clapped for. And that's okay, because the reward wasn't applause, it was peace. Today, I live out loud not for revenge, but for release. I create, I love, I serve, I speak, not to prove anything but to honor everything I've survived. I'm not just healed, I'm whole. And that wholeness, it's mine. No permission needed. Outgrowing pain is one of the most courageous things a soul can do, not because pain is comfortable, but because it's familiar. And familiarity, even when toxic, can feel like safety when you've known nothing else. But I knew I had to break free. I couldn't stay in the same emotional patterns just to keep the peace. I couldn't keep pretending that certain silences didn't wound me. I had to step into discomfort, into truth, into growth. Growth that came with shedding old identities. When you start healing, you lose things. You lose the need to explain yourself. You lose the desire to fix other people's view of you. And sometimes, you lose the very people you once cried to be close to. That's the price of becoming whole. But you gain something too. You gain clarity. You gain integrity. You gain the calm of no longer performing. And most of all, you gain the ability to live for yourself, not their approval, not their validation. just truth, just freedom. So I stopped trying to be the version of myself they wanted. I let go of the daughter, the sister, the girl they painted with shame, and I became me. Not bitter, not broken, just brave enough to start again without asking permission. There's a special kind of loneliness that comes when the people you love can't see your light, when they mock your passion, minimize your dreams, and label your silence as weakness. But that kind of loneliness doesn't mean you're lost, it means you're rising. When people can't control you, they'll try to diminish you. They'll twist your growth into arrogance. They'll call your healing a rebellion. They'll say you've changed like it's an accusation, not a compliment. But you know the truth. You didn't change to hurt them. You changed to save yourself. You chose to stop bleeding for people who wouldn't even hand you a bandage. And that shift, that's when everything starts to align. Not externally, but deep within your soul. The ones who never saw you will act surprised when you shine. They'll say you're acting different, that you're distant, cold. But that's not coldness, it's clarity. You just stopped begging for crumbs from people who never intended to feed you. Let them be confused. Let them whisper. Let them rewrite your story, because you know what you walked through. You know what it cost to become this version of yourself. They don't have to understand it. They were never meant to carry your light. No one came to rescue me. No one stormed in and saved the day. And maybe that was a blessing in disguise, because it forced me to rescue myself, to stop waiting for apologies, explanations, or a family miracle that would never arrive. I used to think healing meant closure, that someone needed to acknowledge what they did. But healing isn't about them. It's about you reclaiming power from every space where pain took up residence. It's about self-redemption. I rewrote the narrative. I stopped waiting for their version to make sense. My story wasn't a tragedy, was a rising, a reclamation, a refusal to let the people who tried to break me define the ending. I took the pen back, and I kept writing, and here's what I learned. Self-redemption is fierce. It's raw. It's holy. It says, you didn't choose me, but I choose me, and that's the moment everything shifts. When you finally look in the mirror and say, you're worth fighting for. So, if you're waiting for closure from someone who won't give it, hear me. You don't need them to acknowledge your worth. The very fact that you survived that, you're still standing is all the proof you'll ever need. You're already redeemed. There's a strength that doesn't shout. It doesn't clap back or demand to be heard. It's the kind that walks away quietly, knowing its value isn't tied to the volume of its voice, but to the depth of its self-respect. That's the kind of strength I learned. When you grow up dismissed, it's tempting to believe you must prove your worth with noise. But true power isn't loud, it's grounded. It's the stillness that refuses to react just to be acknowledged. It's the dignity of knowing who you are without applause. I could have exploded at the gala. I could have screamed every truth I'd buried for years. But I chose something different. I chose to let my presence speak. My resilience, my grace, my refusal to be pulled back into the roles they tried to assign me. That night didn't break me. It revealed me. The woman who once would have crumbled under their rejection now stood unmoved. Not because she didn't feel, but because she no longer needed their recognition to validate her existence. The most powerful thing you can ever do is stay rooted in your truth while the world tries to erase it. That kind of strength that goes long after the moment ends. And it reminds everyone watching that some souls can be silenced. Healing doesn't require revenge. That's something I had to learn the hard way. It's tempting to fantasize about the perfect gotcha moment, the instant they finally see how wrong they were. But healing isn't about proving anything to them. It's about freeing yourself. There were days I thought justice looked like payback, but I came to understand that peace is the highest form of justice, choosing joy in spite of their cruelty. That's power, building a beautiful life they can't touch. That's victory. I didn't need to burn their names to feel whole. I didn't need to expose every lie or win every argument. I just needed to walk away, to invest in the life that was waiting for me beyond their dysfunction. And that choice changed everything. It's not about forgetting what they did. It's about not allowing it to define what you do next. I reclaimed my time, my energy, my story, and I built something honest, something good without them, and that's the most radical revenge of all: peace. So if you're wrestling with the urge to make them feel what you felt, let me offer you this: they already do. Maybe not today, maybe not loudly, but in the quiet of their own minds, they know what they lost. You're too free to care. I used to crave a place to land, a person who would see me, hold space for me, remind me that I wasn't crazy for wanting love without conditions. But when that place didn't exist, I realized something. I could become that place for myself. I learned how to mother my wounds, to father my fears, to sister my sadness, and sit beside my younger self, whispering, "You didn't deserve what happened, but you will rise from it." And slowly, that broken girl began to trust me again. Becoming your own safe place doesn't mean you stop needing people. It means you stop depending on the wrong ones. It means you start choosing support from those who see your soul, not just your usefulness. And that shift is sacred. You become the comfort you always begged for. You speak to yourself with gentleness. You stop calling it too sensitive and start calling it deeply feeling. And you start honoring your story as wholly, not despite the pain, but because of it. So now, when the echoes of abandonment try to sneak back in, I return to that inner sanctuary, the one I built with patience, truth, and grace. I no longer wait for someone else to save me. I already have someone who will me. Some of the worst things that ever happened to me ended up becoming the very soil where my strength grew. What they meant to use against me became the reason I now walk taller. Their rejection. It was painful, but it was also the start of my becoming. Every time Elaine cut me down, she unknowingly planted a seed of determination. Every time Madison tried to make me feel small, she reminded me of the fire inside me. The humiliation at the gala, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something sacred. God has a way of flipping the script. What was supposed to shame you becomes the moment that shapes you. What was meant to exile you becomes the bridge to your elevation. That's not luck. That's divine reversal. I used to ask why I had to suffer so much just to be seen. Now I understand. It wasn't about them seeing me. It was about me seeing myself, seeing the parts of me they never valued and deciding to value them anyway. So if you've been torn down by people who should have lifted you, don't lose heart. Sometimes the betrayal is the birthplace of your breakthrough. Sometimes the darkest rooms are where the brightest parts of you get built. There's a cost to living small just to make others comfortable. I paid that price for years. I made myself less opinionated, less emotional, less ambitious just so I wouldn't upset the balance in a family that never really wanted to hold me. But shrinking didn't bring me peace. It only brought me pain. It robbed me of the joy that comes from showing up fully and unashamed. The more I tried to blend, the more invisible I became. And I was never meant to be invisible. So I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped editing myself to fit someone else's idea of who I should be. I stopped hiding my dreams, my voice, my worth. And you know what? My world didn't fall apart. It expanded. The people who loved me louder. The people who feared my fullness fell away, and that's okay, because I was no longer building my life on their permission. I was building it on truth, on alignment, on freedom. You are not too much. You are not too passionate, too opinionated, too different. You are precisely enough. And the moment you decide to live like it, everything changes. Forgiveness doesn't require a reunion. That's a truth I had to internalize over time. I could release Elaine. I could release Madison. I could release the weight of waiting for apologies that might never come. But release doesn't mean re-entry. Just because I forgave them doesn't mean I owe them access to my life. Grace is about freeing yourself, not giving people another chance to harm you. Boundaries are not bitterness. They're wisdom born from experience. It took me a long time to understand that protecting my peace wasn't cruel. It was necessary. Some people only want you close so they can keep you small. Some only apologize because they want proximity to your progress, not reconciliation. So now I ask myself, are they reaching for healing or just reaching for control? That question has saved me from falling back into old cycles dressed up as redemption, and it's one I return to often. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, but access that's earned. And if someone showed you who they were consistently, believe them even after you've let go of the pain. I used to think strength looked like confrontation, like calling people out or demanding they explain their cruelty. But now, I've learned that sometimes strength is silence, peace, disengagement, walking away without needing the last word. Being unbothered doesn't mean I don't feel. It means I no longer let their behavior dictate my emotional climate. They can gossip, they can scoff, they can twist the truth, and I'll still risen to unmoved, unbothered. That's the power of healing. You get to choose where your energy flows. And when you stop giving your peace away to people who haven't earned it, you become unshakable. That's not ego, that's evolution. Let them misunderstand you. Let them underestimate you. That's not your burden to carry. You weren't called to explain your light to people committed to darkness. You were called to shine anyway. So I stopped trying to be understood by people who were never listening. I stopped defending my joy. And in the stillness, I found something priceless: clarity, confidence, and the quiet confidence of knowing I'm enough. There's something healing about becoming who you once needed. I used to wish someone would stand up for me, that someone would tell me I mattered, that someone would look me in the eye and say, "You're not crazy. You were treated unfairly." But that person never came. So I became her myself. I looked in the mirror and said all the words I'd longed to hear. I started treating myself with the tenderness I used to beg for from others. And everything shifted. The validation I craved from Elaine, I gave to myself. The protection I hoped for from my father, I became my own protector. The acceptance Madison withheld, I stopped waiting for it and offered it to me. When you start meeting your own needs, you stop being at the mercy of people who never planned to meet them anyway. That's where freedom begins. That's where healing finds its roots. So now, I mentor younger women. I tell them their voices matter. I hold space for their pain and remind them, you don't have to wait for someone else to rescue you. You can become the safe place you always searched for. In my old life, I performed. I smiled through pain. I tried to be palatable. I did what I thought would earn love, thinking if I could just be better, maybe they'd treat me better. But performing for love is a losing game. Love that must be earned through effort isn't love. It's approval. And approval is conditional. I learned that the hard way through years of bending, twisting, and shrinking to keep people from walking away. But real love, it doesn't require performance. It holds space for your humanity. It welcomes your flaws. It makes room for your messy and still calls you worthy. That's the kind of love I have now. That's what I choose. And with that kind of love especially, from yourself comes peace. Deep, unshakable peace. The kind that doesn't hinge on who's clapping or who's criticizing. The kind that says, even if they never see my value, I do. So now, I no longer perform. I just am. And in that being, I've found everything I was searching for in the applause of people who were never meant to hold my heart in the first place. In the days following the gala, I found myself moving through the world with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just the public vindication that brought relief, it was the deeper, quieter truth that I no longer carried their rejection like a wound. Something inside me had healed the moment I looked into Elaine's face and saw her power unravel. I didn't need her apology. I didn't need Madison's approval. I didn't need anyone to confirm what I already knew, that I had value, that I belonged in this world, and that the person I had become was forged in the fire of their absence. Each time I walked into the gallery, I stood a little taller. My colleagues, once unaware of the storm I had weathered, now saw a strength in me that hadn't been visible before. I wasn't defined by what I'd endured, but I was undeniably shaped by it. The shame I once carried, the feeling of being discarded, no longer had a place in my spirit. That weight had been replaced with clarity. And with clarity came purpose. I began to realize that maybe the point of all that pain wasn't just survival, it was transformation. Nathan and I would talk late into the night about what came next. We were no longer just living a life together, we were building a legacy, one rooted not in wealth or prestige, but in truth, healing, and justice. I told him I wanted to create something permanent from the pain, something that would outlive the Matthews name and carry the one part of that legacy. I did want to honor my father's. His failures hurt me deeply, but his love for art and for me, in the moments he allowed himself to show it, deserved to be remembered. So we began planning the foundation. Every decision we made was intentional. The mission would be personal, the message clear. No child should ever feel unseen in their own home. No young artist should ever believe their voice doesn't matter, and no grief should ever go unacknowledged. For the first time, my past wasn't something to be ashamed of, it was the soil where something beautiful could grow. I had finally taken back the pen to write my own story, and the ink no longer bled with pain. Looking back, I now understand that liberation doesn't always arrive in quiet epiphanies. Sometimes it enters like a storm, through ballroom doors, wearing a tuxedo and calling your name loud enough for the world to hear. That night wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about theatrics. It was about me seeing myself clearly for the first time and never letting go of that vision again. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of that evening reached further than I anticipated. Stories circulated in Boston's upper circles. But for once, I wasn't the subject of ridicule. I was the mirror they had all been avoiding. Elaine's carefully curated image as a philanthropic socialite began to crumble under the weight of what people had witnessed firsthand. There were murmurs about her stepping down from the foundation, whispers that Madison's behavior had tarnished their reputation beyond repair, but I felt no joy in their downfall, only distance. What surprised me more were the messages that trickled in from extended family, some apologetic, others performative. I read them all, but only responded to a few. I wasn't interested in reopening doors that led to rooms still filled with ego and denial. My peace wasn't negotiable. What I had gained was too precious to jeopardize for the sake of shallow reconciliation. The world they lived in, the one where image was everything, no longer held power over me. I had my own world now, built on something far stronger than legacy, integrity. My Aunt Jeunesse apology stood out because it didn't come with expectations. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She offered accountability that, more than anything, created a bridge. Through her, I began to reclaim pieces of my father I thought had been lost forever. Stories of him shielding my artwork from Elaine's criticism, or quietly donating to the gallery without telling anyone. In her quiet way, Janet became the family member I never had, a witness to my pain, and now a participant in my healing. I didn't seek revenge. I sought redemption, not for them, but for myself, and in doing so, I learned something powerful. The truth, when spoken clearly and unapologetically, rearranges everything. The people who once viewed me as expendable were now scrambling to reframe their version of events. But it was too late. My story had already been reclaimed. My silence had ended. The Harper they thought they knew was gone, and the woman standing in her place didn't need their permission to rise. And yet, even as all this unfolded, I never let it become my whole identity. Yes, the gala had been a turning point, but the true transformation came in the quiet choices after, the people I chose to keep, the boundaries I honored, and the purpose I stepped into. I didn't become someone new that night. I remembered who I had always been and finally chose to stand in it, fully and without apology. Launching the Thomas Matthews Art Therapy Foundation was both the most emotional and the most empowering experience of my life. We held the inaugural event in a modest, sunlit gallery space, nothing like the cold opulence of the Rosewood Ballroom. There were no chandeliers, no elite society guests, no staged performances, just real people, therapists, educators, parents, children, and me standing in front of a community I actually belonged to, telling a story that had finally found its purpose. I spoke from the heart that evening, not with the polished detachment of a charity director, but with the raw truth of someone who knew what it meant to be unseen. I told them about my father, his love for art, his quiet grief, his inability to protect me. I told them about the night I was escorted toward a door I never belonged behind, and how I chose to turn around and walk back into the room with my head held high. And I told them that this foundation was not about erasing the past, it was about rewriting its legacy for those who came next. Nathan stood beside me the entire night, offering the kind of support that never needed to be spoken aloud. His presence was grounding, his belief in me unshakable. He hadn't just helped me fund this mission, he had helped me believe it mattered. Every child who entered one of our programs would now have access to healing through creativity. And every donation made wasn't just a check, it was a vote for the power of transformation. A belief that pain could become possibility. After the event, as we walked home under the Boston night sky, I felt tears fall not from sadness, but from gratitude. Everything that had once been taken from me, my family, my home, my place at the table, had been replaced by something infinitely more meaningful. I wasn't seeking to prove myself anymore. I was simply offering what I'd found: hope, voice, and restoration. My story was on Tejas' mine anymore. It had become a bridge for others to walk over, and in that, I had found my legacy. Not built on old money or inherited power, but on truth, healing, and the undeniable strength of a girl who refused to disappear. In the aftermath of the gala and the foundation's launch, something unexpected began to take root in my life: a sense of family. Not the kind tied together by blood or shared last names, but the kind you choose and who choose you back without conditions. Janet became a quiet, consistent presence, never overstepping, but always showing up. Nathan's family had already wrapped me in warmth years ago, but now that embrace felt deeper, more meaningful, as they celebrated the birth of something I had built from my pain. And my friends, the ones who had stood by me when I had nothing to offer but late-night rants and secondhand wine, were now my inner circle, my tribe. We started gathering regularly, not for obligation or show, but for connection. Dinners full of laughter, birthday celebrations that didn't feel like performances, and even casual game nights that turned into safe spaces for truth. I realized that family isn't about who shares your past, it's about who protects your present and believes in your future. In these spaces, I was never Harper Matthews, the estranged daughter. I was simply Harper, artist, advocate, friend, wife, a woman no longer defined by who had walked away, but by who had walked in. Madison and Elaine faded further into the background of my life, their voices replaced by those who uplifted instead of diminished. And as they faded, the wounds they left began to scar, overt, not erased, but no longer raw. I didn't follow what became of them. I didn't need to. Their consequences were no longer my burden. The spotlight they had once used to shame me had turned, and I was no longer interested in standing anywhere near it. I had found the light on my own terms, and it was gentler, warmer, and far more enduring. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you stop seeking closure from people incapable of giving it, when you stop waiting for apologies, for explanations, for justice. Peace isn't always about resolution. Sometimes it's about release. I had released the version of me who still longed for a seat at their table. I had built my own table instead, surrounded by people who didn't need convincing to love me. And that shift changed everything from how I walked into rooms to how I looked in the mirror. That was the gift I had given myself. Not revenge, not recognition, but release. The moment I accepted that some people would never love me the way I needed, I stopped letting that define my worth. And in its place, I cultivated love that felt like truth, family that felt like home, and success that had nothing to do with status but everything to do with soul. One morning, several months after the foundation launch, I sat in my studio, surrounded by children's drawings, drying on every wall. One little girl, 8 years old, like I had been when my world fell apart, had painted a picture of a girl holding a candle in the dark. She'd titled it, "Finding Her Way." I stood in front of it for a long time, something tightening in my chest. It wasn't just a drawing. It was a reflection of every part of me that had once felt lost, invisible, and forgotten. And suddenly, I understood that this wasn't just about helping others heal. It was about healing the version of myself who had once needed this space. For years, I had tried to become someone deserving of love, someone who wasn't too emotional, too creative, too inconvenient. I had tried to shrink, to shape-shift, to blend in. But here, surrounded by these children and their stories, I realized I had never been broken. I had just been unheard. And now, I was building a world where no child would have to scream to be seen, where tears were not shameful, and vulnerability was not a weakness but a superpower. This was the work I had been born to do, and in doing it, I was rewriting the ending of my own story. I began writing letters not to send, but to unburden. One to my mother, thanking her for the brief but profound love that had anchored me through years of neglect. One to my father, telling him everything I wished he had seen, everything I hoped he knew. Juan Duelaini not in anger, but in trutha, letter that acknowledged the damage she had done and released me from carrying it any longer. And finally, one to the little girl inside me, the one who used to hide in the library stacks after school, painting her feelings into notebooks because no one was listening. To her, I wrote, "You were never too much, you were never the problem. They just didn't know how to love something so bright." I cried, writing that. But it wasn't a painful cry. It was a cleansing one. The kind that clears space for something new to grow. The kind that says, it's okay now. You're safe. Ew. I've got you. And in that moment, I became both the protector and the protected. The adult I had always needed, the advocate I had become. Healing isn't linear. There are days I still feel that familiar ache. But it no longer controls me. It visits, acknowledges itself, and when it does, I look around at the life I've built, the marriage, the mission, the family of choice, and I remind myself, this is real. This is mine. And it's more than enough. It wasn't until a year later that I visited my father's grave again. I had avoided it for years, not out of anger, but out of unfinished grief. I hadn't known how to talk to the man who'd loved me in pieces, then left me with so many of them scattered. But that spring, something in me said, it was time. I brought a single white rose and a copy of the Foundation's brochure, tucked in a folder with photos from the children's art sessions. I knelt beside the stone and sat in silence for a long time, letting the wind do the talking. When I finally spoke, it wasn't with blame. It was with love, the complicated kind, the honest kind. I told him about Nathan, about how he had loved me without conditions, without pretense. I told him about the night of the gala and how I had finally stepped into the truth. I told him I had forgiven him not because what he did was okay, but because carrying the weight of his choices was no longer mine to bear. I laid the brochure against the headstone and whispered, "Your name still means something." I made sure of it. It wasn't about redeeming my past. It was about anchoring my future in something deeper than pain. As I stood up to leave, I didn't feel sadness. I felt closure. A final chapter written, not in grief, but in grace. And as I walked back to the car, Nathan was there, waiting. No questions, just a hand extended, steady and warm. The kind of presence my younger self would have given anything for, and now, finally had, life moved forward. The foundation grew. Our family, in time, did too. But I never forgot the girl who stood in that ballroom surrounded by shame and found something deeper than dignity. She found her voice, and with it, she built a future her past couldn't destroy. Because, in the end, the greatest revenge was not success. It was peace. Not spectacle, but sovereignty. If you've ever been made to feel like an outsider in your own family, like your voice didn't matter or your worth depended on how much you conformed to their image, please hear me now. You are not the problem. Their inability to love you the right way says more about them than it ever will about you. And just because someone shares your last name doesn't mean they share your heart. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to protect your peace. And you're allowed to build a new life with people who truly see you. My story is not unique because of the drama. It's powerful because of the transformation. Because I learned that we are allowed to rewrite the story others tried to write for us. We are allowed to rise from rejection, not just bitter but better, stronger, clearer. What once made you feel small can become the exact reason you rise. Not everyone will understand your glow up, especially those who tried to dim your light. Let them watch. Let them whisper. You're not here to fit in their world, you're here to create your own. I hope this story reminded you that your silence is not your destiny, your pain is not your identity, and your past is not your prison. It can be your power. What they meant to destroy you actually built you. They underestimated your resilience. And when you stopped waiting for their permission to rise, you became unstoppable. The truth is, we don't need to prove ourselves to people committed to misunderstanding us. We just need to remember who we are. So if you're listening to this and you've ever felt overlooked, unloved, or unwanted, take this as your sign. You are more than enough. You were never too sensitive, too complicated, too emotional. You were just surrounded by people who didn't know how to hold someone so powerful. Now it's your time. Time to stop shrinking. Time to speak louder. Time to take up space unapologetically. And here's the real truth they don't want you to know. The moment you detach your worth from their approval, you become untouchable. They lose their power. You stop chasing love and start attracting it, real love, rooted in truth, not convenience. The kind of love that doesn't require you to shrink, perform, or apologize for existing. That love starts with you, with your choice to stop playing small in rooms that were never built for your greatness. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of your worth or gave you the courage to reclaim your voice, share your experience in the comments. I read every single one. Like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories that validate your journey and speak to your soul. And remember, sometimes the greatest act of healing is simply choosing yourself and never looking back. Because once you finally see your own value, you'll never settle for crumbs again.